Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. Let's see, to interact with us, you can send questions and comments to our Facebook stream, our YouTube stream, or I think we even have a couple other little ways to get in touch with us. But those are the best two ways as of right now. So, good evening. My name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And we have the full house tonight, starting with Jason Richards from a remote location.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Jason Richards here, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C., coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Yes, thank you very much
Wisconsin.
for joining us on vacation. It's appreciated.
Yeah, thank my wife.
Yes, everybody. Thank Jason's wife. Let's see. Next up, Mike the intern. Good evening.
Good evening, Mike the intern here, Mike Hambricht, member of Triandria Lodge number 780, where I am the junior deacon and lodge education officer, as well as Lakeshore Lodge number, gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head anyway. But anyway, that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Juan Sepulveda, good evening. How are you this evening?
Hello, everybody. Juan Sepulveda here from Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in sunny and soon to be windy Kissimmee, Florida.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm the host of, yes. So we have a hurricane on its way over here for all you people away from Florida. This is like a yearly thing. So we have everything pretty much ready. We're just waiting for last minute preparations if we need them. But otherwise, everything moving as normal.
It's that time of year. All right.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks and good evening.
Good evening.
Last but not least, the one, the only, Robert Johnson.
What up?
What's going on?
Hey, everybody. I was going to just do the line from Clerks. I'm not even supposed to be here today. I wasn't planning on being on the show, but lucky for nobody. AMD was an hour and 10 minutes away, and I just feel like going. So shame on me, but this is a better Masonic meeting anyway. So, Robert Johnson, past master, all that good stuff. Host of Whence Came You, here tonight on the Masonic Roundtable, talking about innovations, my favorite.
Yes, because there are no innovations in Freemasonry.
Nope.
Except for when there are.
All of them.
Yes, all of them. Yeah. So
Third degree.
Before we dive into that, also we do want to give a special shout out to the patrons who've been supporting the show. You can come on over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable to support the show, become a knight, squire, or page, and that all goes to all our equipment and all the other good stuff that helps keep this show going. So thanks in advance to all you guys. Let's see. Tonight we're going to talk about innovations in Masonry. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Masonry and how it's set up in its structure, if you're on the outside looking in, we are a fraternity full of traditions. So much, in fact, that the traditions have traditions. And so, because we are proud of our heritage, our history, our lineage, and our ritual, we take extra precautions not to perturb a lot of those traditions just for the sake of innovation. In fact, many jurisdictions have warnings against innovating in Masonry. And so tonight we're going to talk about, this is a listener requested episode, of how can you innovate, right? What are the edges of what's allowed and what's not? And we're going to talk about how we've seen it occur across our various jurisdictions, about how far do you push it, what's kind of a good process, who do you ask permission for, do you ask permission, and all the guardrails that you're going to have to come across if you expect to introduce any innovation in Masonry. Since Robert said it's his favorite topic, let's talk about it, Robert. Where and how can someone innovate in Illinois Masonry?
So the first thing that pops to mind as when I think about innovation is I was going through Grand Lodge proceedings. I'm actually in the process of taking up the mantle of scanning all of our old Grand Lodge proceedings and getting them digitized OCR. And one of the things I came across that I had only heard passing references to in the past actually is this idea that you have to use a tracing board in order to explain the different lectures. And what is strictly forbidden is the use of one stereopticon. And I thought how ridiculous that was. If you guys don't know what the stereopticon is, it's either you can do an internet search, and what you'll find are two devices. The thing that you hold up in an antique store, right? You hold it up to your eyes and you put like a three-dimensional card drop in, and then it looks 3D. So that's a version of a stereopticon. Or there are projectors that use two lenses to project something, and those are totally illegal still in the code. No stereopticons. But we use digital projectors. We use old school carousel projectors. It's really kind of interesting when you think about innovation in terms of, like, that is a mechanical innovation. Of course, there are the more, I don't know, I don't want to call them holistic because they're real things, right? But like the degree work, you can't innovate there. Yet we do, right? Like when we do outdoor degrees, or when we do a degree in a cave, or when the Grandmaster issues a dispensation for you to do a degree in railroad garb or something. We make all kinds of innovations all the time. And it seems to really be just kind of the purview of the Grandmaster whether or not he's going to allow something like that. But also, what I find is there's a lot of innovation in Freemasonry that just isn't considered innovation, or because maybe it's so slight, or maybe they just don't tell anybody they're doing it. And then it's one of those things where, like, if you don't know what they don't know doesn't hurt them, right? But where do you draw that line as somebody like myself? I'm a pretty big traditionalist. Like, I like well done, serious ritual. So I don't like innovating on the ritual, those kind of things. Some would call video degrees an innovation in Masonry, but they're also not beholden to the same rules. So where do we go?
Right. I mean, so that's a good point you brought up, that you can have technological or mechanical innovations to improve the either initiatic experience, the business experience, or whatever. But you may also have affinity lodges, right, that we talked about in previous episodes, that are tailoring the content toward a specific subset of the population. And then you have the real dangerous part of innovating on ritual. And that's where you really need to dot your I's and cross your T's. Because, I'll say the first thing that anyone should do if they're trying to, even if in the best interest of the candidate, the experience, the lodge, whatever you do first, make sure you memorize, and I mean memorize, your Grand Lodge laws, rules, and edicts. So that way, at least in Virginia, we have our Grand Lodge laws are called they're codified in what we call the Methodical Digest. And what I like about it is that it gets updated annually as new resolutions get adopted, but it also shows kind of a history of when we clarified this rule this year, and then we added an addendum this year, and so it builds on itself. You can see what's been tried in the past. But if you don't know that, and this is just generic advice for any officer of a lodge, you really need to know how your jurisdiction operates, because it's different for all 5 of us here. It's going to be different. However it was in one jurisdiction and you moved, completely different rules. And so,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, John, and I hope I don't upset you by saying this, but I think John's probably become an expert on what's allowed in Virginia, and I've become an expert on what's allowed in Illinois, because we may have gotten talked to about something in the past, in just various things, and it's just because we tried something and it didn't go over well. Like, I've tried things that they said, hey, we can't do that anymore.
Yep.
The first time ever we tried any kind of, I asked about a chamber of reflection before we were allowed. We're still not allowed to do those, and they said no chambers of reflection, but nobody said you can't have a preparation room that looks really nice. So, like, what do you do, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point to finish up my thought. Was once you know the rules, and this is just my approach for how I operate at work, how I operate with lots of different things. Once you know the rule, once you know where that line is, you know how far to go, and you know how to not break the rule, but get right up to it, or even bend it a little bit within certain tolerance. So if you don't know where that line is first, you won't know how far you can go before you're going to start getting a talking to. So that's kind of step one. Juan, what are your thoughts on understanding where the line is, and then what would your next steps be after you really know what's within the realm of the possible for any innovation you might make?
Yeah, well, first of all, when we write here in the title for our show, innovate, can we innovate? What's an innovation? Anybody that reads it may have a different interpretation of what that represents. And what I have seen is that there seems to be a rigidity that accompanies a certain demographic. So you will have people who perhaps have been members of the fraternity for many decades, and they have an expectation of how Masonry should be practiced, and all the different things that surround the practice, and they seem to be a little bit more hesitant to change. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people that are brand new to the fraternity who have a pocket full of innovations in mind, and the impetus to actually try to go out and innovate. So I see that as time goes by, there is an in between those things. There are things that are part of Masonry that have been neglected with time, that some people may consider innovations if they were introduced to the craft in today's lodge. But it's a matter of being well informed. Um, one example that quickly comes to mind: if you were to uh, incorporate music into the degrees, and I have to measure my words here because all right, I have to measure my words because I don't want to offend anyone in particular. But what I can say is that I am 100% in favor of there being music accompanying many aspects of the lodge. There should be
I'm so
music.
offended.
Yeah, I know, especially the musician. Having music, solemn music, patriotic music, whenever the colors are presented for the Pledge of Allegiance, or having some very reverential music playing in the background whenever a brother is exercising the privilege of casting a ballot, and having some solemn music whenever there is a prayer being had. I think all of those things enhance the Masonic experience. It changes the monotony that could be attributed to some meetings, especially when they incorporate a lot of elements like voting and these things. And I've sat in front of a brother or two who will start mumbling and like in complete anger because they hear music while things are going on. And
Wow, I mean that's amazing. The
yeah,
emotional reaction that someone would have to something which you would perceive to be innocent, an innocent
of this
change.
of the seven
Here's a
liberal
question.
arts and sciences, the most developed has no place in Masonry.
So,
You know,
Juan,
What are
it's
you going to?
crazy.
are these
Go
brethren
ahead.
who might have hearing aids, where it's very difficult for them to filter out the voice from the music, or are these just crotchety individuals? Okay.
Yeah, and not even necessarily both. Like I'm talking about some of the most active, most influential brothers in my lodge. They just absolutely hate the music component. In my case, I am completely in favor. Like I want more music, and I want it, because I think that when you surrender to being at uh, encompassed, within all those different feelings, when you're able to have incense burning during a degree, and you have music, that when the lights are tenue, help me out here,
Dimming.
tenue, yeah, when they're dimmed, um, that adds to the entire experience. Now, I understand the discomfort that can come with someone innovating on the experience of that brother, but that doesn't mean that it's an innovation in Masonry. It's something that is part of Masonry. There is music that has been composed for the purpose of accompanying all those stages of the Masonic experience. But that kind of shines a light on that. Can you innovate in Masonry? You know, in some aspects, yes, but the majority of the things that you would think are considered innovations, they're not. They're reintroductions of something that was already supposed to be a part of the craft anyway.
Ooh, now that's
COR.
that's an interesting aspect. You could argue about even the traditional observance movement, who are trying to get back to the way things were, are getting pushback because you're changing. Well, no, we're changing back. We're going back to what it already was. Um, so that's a
Well, it's funny
fascinating
because
observation. What do you think, Jason?
masonry's masonry's collective, institutional wisdom only goes back, maybe 30 or 40 years,
That is true.
maybe in most cases 50 years. Because you think about it, you have the oldest members are, in their 80s and 90s. They The most active oldest members are really in their 70s. So even if they joined right at about 18, which is statistically unlikely given the joining trends post 1959, what they know about masonry only stretches back, from their personal experience, at least 50 years max. So 50 years ago, we're in the 1970s at this point, 1960s, 1970s, in the post-war era, where masonry is really charging hardcore toward being an organization devoted to fraternalism and not esoterics. So you even see this with Grand Lodge jurisdictions that outlaw rounded aprons. Sorry, the original Masonic aprons were round. They didn't start making them square until mass production in the late 1800s during the Industrial Revolution, because they were easier and cheaper to manufacture if they were square. So the folks who are advocating for squared aprons only, because that's traditional, that's how Masonry has already done it, they're actually advocating for a cheaper product. Like,
That's like, is that the? I don't know if this is the right expression. I've probably never used this before. That when the tail wags the dog. Is that the case here, where cheap masonry becomes cheap masonry? No,
No,
probably not.
I
That's
think
probably
it's
not a
I
great
think it's
example.
more than that, because you aren't picking something because it's cheap or because it's ineffective. You're just going with what you've known, and you're in that craft, longer than everybody, so you know how the craft has always been, ostensibly. And um, I think we're getting a lot of pushback to moving back to these traditional roots of Freemasonry, because we have these folks that have been in the craft 30, 40, 50 years, and the fraternalistic nature of the craft is everything they've ever known. So it's completely foreign to them. And of course, these folks are generally speaking the ones in Grand Lodge leadership and leadership in other organizations. And they just kind of clamp down on it and say, no, we're a traditional Grand Lodge, which means we talk about George Washington. Esoterics have no place, and wear your square aprons.
That's the way we've always done it.
Is it though?
When Juan was talking
Is it
about,
though?
yeah, right. When Juan was talking about the music, all I could think about was a poor example of music, and I don't know. There's a brother who might be watching, and this was a particular lodge that I went to that he was in. Uh, they played the Peter Gunn theme when it came time to tile the lodge, and I don't know, that was kind of cheeseball to me. So I think it can go both ways. Somebody in the chat had asked what was good, as far as music goes.
Yeah, and I'm
I
with
played
you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm with you, RJ, with that. Stop it, Jason.
Would it have been better to be Mission Impossible?
No, go right ahead, Jason.
I played an acoustic rendition of "Welcome to the Jungle" when we tiled the lodge during John's year.
And you know what? So I got to talk about that. It was unexpectedly awesome because I gave Jason carte blanche to choose as the lodge DJ, lodge musician, what to pick, and just said make it tasteful. And man, he knocked it out of the park, because I was like, I know I've heard this song before. This is really good. Oh, and I'm sitting there in the East while this trying to keep the lodge running, but at the same time, the wave of emotions that hit me when I finally realized what it was. But it worked. It absolutely worked.
And I mean, and one other note about just music being an amazing accompaniment to lodge. So the Patriot Lodge is an affinity lodge to the George Mason University, and as part of the opening of each of the lodges, there was a certain place where I would actually play the George Mason School song, and that to me just helped settle everybody, reinforce why they were there, and draw attention back to the reason for this lodge's existence, which was its partnership with George Mason University. And so music, when done right and done well, it just amplifies the entire experience and just helps you settle your mind and get you in the right mindset for going to lodge.
All right, so Hammy, question for you. Do you ask for permission or not? And what consequences do you have to deal with depending on that approach?
Well, yeah, if we're still just talking about doing something like the music, yeah, I say you just do it and ask for forgiveness, because at least in that, you haven't introduced anything that changes the entire ritual or the entire. It doesn't change lodge in a large way. If you're going to change all around aprons in your lodge, and have them have red borders instead of blue or something like that, well, yes, now in that case, yeah, now you're going to have to ask first. I mean, you're really going to have to say, okay, is this something we're allowed to do? Because when a Grand Lodge representative shows up, whether it's a DDGM or somebody else in your lodge and sees this, if you haven't asked for permission, well, yeah, it's done. You're going to find yourself in a lot of hot water. That's how I would see it. Whether or not you look to see if you're should ask for permission or just try it.
How about
I
you,
would say
Juan?
that there are things for which you should ask for permission. I don't think you should be asking for permission for everything. I believe that if you're certain that what you are attempting to do within the lodge is not something that goes against what the lodge stands for. For example, enhancing the ritual by way of incorporating incense. It's part of our ritual. It's part of our tradition. Incorporating music. I don't think you have to ask anybody about playing music in lodge. It's a given. Like every single lodge has an organ there, or two or three covered with some plastic for a reason. Usually the reason for having two or three is complex, but I think that relying too heavily on going around asking for validation for every single initiative that your lodge takes place, I think that can be counterproductive, and I don't think it serves anybody. Now if you're gonna start bringing a goat into your degree, if you're going to start roughing people out around in degree, then like that's a different story. That's a kind of even though it wouldn't be innovation.
I'm not sure that some of what you said is an innovation. I'll leave it there.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm biting my tongue around.
Yeah.
Well, but other things, for example, like making it a virtual lodge,
Oh yeah, you can't do that.
Or bringing in, a TV or a projector and your computer and bringing in a speaker via Skype or something. These are things that could go either way. So it's how do you get around to some of that by making sure when you do it the first time you make it an untiled presentation. That way you're at least not having to worry about anybody saying, well, it's not tiled when you bring in the camera. It's experimental, and you see what if you're going to try it one way. If or if you're worried, ask your DDGM.
So, question for you guys. We'll go around. What has been the largest innovation, just to put everything in one category? What's been the most interesting experience that you've seen so far deviated from the norm that you're used to in all of your travels? Because that's one of the benefit that we get as Master Masons is to travel to other lodges, and you can see not only work from different jurisdictions, but maybe some lodges themselves have taken upon themselves to push up against these barriers and try new things. And so I'm going to kind of open it up for all of your travels. What's been the most forward-leaning thing that you've seen and observed, without attribution, without calling out any brothers or lodge names in particular? But what have been some of the coolest things that you've seen? Starting with Jason.
All right. So without getting anyone in trouble, spent some time traveling with a lodge. Went there to go visit, and they did two things that were kind of amazing. First and foremost, they used incense. So they walked incense around the lodge room before it opened, which is cool in theory. I hate incense; it makes me gag. So having to having to speak for an hour in a room full of incense was interesting, but I get where they were going with that. The other piece of it was I went to another lodge, um, and before every single meeting, the worshipful master got up and said, "Brethren, we're going to take a couple minutes to quiet our hearts and do some meditation." And so the musician played a little bit for like 2 or 3 minutes, and everybody in the lodge room just sat there in silent meditation and contemplation, which is probably the single coolest lodge experience I've ever had.
There you go. How about you, Robert?
Great question. I've experienced those things also, and I thought they were the same things as Jason, and I thought they were amazing the first time I had saw them as well. I would have to say the coolest innovation is, in some respect, so two things I'll mention. One is that when a lodge actually takes advantage of the power they're given. So, for instance, to open a lodge with just the officers and then immediately go to refreshment while everybody hangs out in the lobby, and then we do education, and then just those guys go back in and close real quick. I thought that was like efficient and cool for an education night, that, and they were required to open. So that was interesting. I think the coolest innovation is, and it really isn't an innovation other than sometimes it goes against Grand Lodge code. Again, going through Illinois code is very similar to other states, right? So if you look through your state codes, your bylaws and constitutions, you might see something in there that stemmed out of the conservators movement, where grandmasters basically made an edict that all lectures and degree work had to be like stand there and deliver it. Just, I mean, you can't inflect. I mean, there was no, and so in the boards and the people who taught the degree work weren't allowed to teach it in a way that had any kind of real meaning to it, right? So you just ended up with a guy, you know, reading the ingredients off of a Pepsi can in it just monotone and rattling as fast as possible. And then we have this emphasis on how well you learn a ritual now, but it's about word perfect, you know, it's not about delivery. So the thing that I experienced was a third degree delivery of some parts, probably about 4.5, 5 years ago, that were so powerful when they happened. I like jumped back in my seat, and I was like, "Is that allowed?" And everybody's like, "Why wouldn't it be allowed?" Oh, because back in 18 whatever it says, you know, you can't do that. But now, you know, so when you travel around though, you see those things and then you bring them home, right? My senior warden, Spencer Hammond, says, if you see anything cool that Space Novum Lodge does, it's because we stole it. And it's not 100% true. Like, we invented 3 or 4 things that we do specifically, that we've cleared with the Board of Grand Examiners before we ever implemented them. But the point is, you can go travel, grab some cool stuff that you see, and bring it back. And so, yeah, it's become kind of a standard now to actually perform ritual rather
Right.
than to recite ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Call it an innovation or call it our return to the way it was. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Juan? Hold on for a second. Try that again.
We can't hear
Yeah.
you on. There you are.
Well, I try to play my AC tone for you, so you missed out. Sorry. Uh, The the one the one that first comes to mind, I rather not share. Um, but I would say that the ones I mentioned earlier, that some people would consider innovations, would be music. Instead of playing an organ, actually having a Bluetooth speaker, position where the organ is, and controlling it via, a mobile phone hidden on the side of you know, the chair, perfectly timed, perfectly synchronized, just freaking amazing. So from the technological standpoint, yes, that's an innovation. I think that's um, a very easy to implement thing that brothers could try to emulate, and it would add something. And for those of you wondering, like, how create a playlist in your favorite music app, whether it's your, whatever it is, and that playlist has one song for every one of the aspects or the stages of your meeting. So you can have a specific song for the presentation of the colors, for voting, for whenever uh, the lights are being arranged, all of that. And only that's happening. You're doing it discreetly while it's happening, and just make sure that you test it at home so that you don't get an unexpected, like in those weddings. Have you seen those weddings where it's the the nuptial march, and then like halfway through it goes into a hard reggaeton or something, and it ruins the wedding? Make sure you listen. Make sure you listen to the whole song if you're gonna do it.
Yeah, my favorite is when like you're practicing. We use a Bluetooth speaker also, and you'll connect, and then the speaker has like a weird connection or disconnect noise, and so you haven't used the speaker for a little part during a degree or a ceremony, and then all of a sudden you go to play something, and then it plays some goofball off. I mean, just
like a chime.
Like yeah, it'll play like a chime, but like something from your childhood, like Humpty Dumpty, like da 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 da.
Oh,
you're like, what the heck? Way to ruin the ambience.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's fair. How about you, Hammy? What have you seen in your travels?
Well, like Jason, I saw the incense thing. And the same lodge that did that did something that, today we might consider it an innovation, but it's actually a return to the way things used to be. But singing in lodge, the members singing. And I actually think that's a great idea. If you can't sing, I mean, even if you don't have the ability, I mean, but if you can't sing with your brothers, where else can you do it? I mean,
In the shower.
Sings in the shower. Yeah, everybody does that one. But I mean, you know what I really mean by that? It's if you can't, feel comfortable even singing badly in front of your brothers, you can't ever do it. I mean, that's the thing. And I think that's just one thing that, it's about feeling that, and there is a feeling from doing it because I've done it more than once. So, and I think it's something that, I actually liked. The incense, I get your thing there too, Jason, about, almost wanting to gag, but honestly, if done adequately, and I'll say that in a, without getting too heavy, it can be okay. At least from my perspective.
Would having one of those aroma therapy, how those humidifiers that have specific oils you can put in them,
Right.
especially like if there's
Diffusers.
a brother, yeah, one of those. Especially if there's a brother who has an aversion to
Like the smoke,
incense,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
you could still have one of these and have some eucalyptus,
New car
saffron.
smell.
Hey,
Yeah, new
why
cars.
not?
One of the. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was just gonna codify my experience too, to repeat a lot of what you got. The part that was most interesting to me was when the lodges made it a sacred space, a solemn event. And to me, I'll go right out and say it. That is the real innovation in Masonry, because most people join. I mean, you yourself, Jason, said you joined because of the fraternalism, the fraternal aspect, the social aspect, and found a solemn space, a sacred space within that. And so I think to make the effort as a lodge to play music, play incense, set up time for quiet reflection, like that alone is awesome, first and foremost, but two, it's an innovation of the way things are currently done. I had one experience where after the traditional opening prayer, they followed it up with an older Egyptian prayer, talking about the blessings of Isis and Osiris, and I thought that was amazing. And I quickly, when the time was right, went to my phone and tried to search for that prayer and found that prayer, so I could recall it and see the context and see what it was really saying. And I found that to be not only a solemn experience, but also an educational experience in itself by an opening prayer, if you really think of it that way. So that's kind of neat. And then I can't believe none of us have mentioned yet Castle Island Virtual Lodge. Right? That Castle Island Virtual Lodge is an innovation in itself, one that is sponsored by multiple Grand Masters, and yet has made so many progressions forward in Masonry that it's here to stay. It's got an established track record. It's getting visitations from Grand Masters throughout the states. So I think it's an innovation that is sticking. It's staying. You don't see too many, especially in the United States, copycats of that. They're still kind of the one and the best. I think that what they do have a virtual lodge down in Australia, New Zealand. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Australia, Victoria.
Yes, that's right. So, so they were able to emulate that down there. Some work to be done here in the States as well. But I think, again, so I've actually talked about two divergent things, whether you make it more sacred and solemn or whether you put it online and do education anytime, anywhere. But you can see the emphasis on both those cases was not on the meeting, was not on the business, was not on minutes. It was on everything else.
It seems to be like two sides of the same coin, right? So we have two kinds of education, really, right? We have the internal education, and we have kind of the external or the exoteric education that takes place on your, no disrespect, but like your Mitch Horowitz stuff, right? Like, I can tell you everything about everything. I might not be a practitioner. I mean, he might be a practitioner, I don't know, but he's written a lot of books. Or there's like the in-lodge experience where you're doing some actual inner work using the working tools, contemplatively. And then you've got like, the exoteric kind of George Washington was a Mason. Abe Lincoln may or may not have petitioned a lodge. Andrew Jackson, who knows? But yeah, and I think it serves two purposes, really. And I'm okay with both of them. I love both. I'm a bilogical.
Yeah, a bilogical. That's funny. I like it. It's gonna stick. Hashtag bilogical. I want to see that in the super chat tonight.
What about a panlogical?
Pan. You you like you accept all lodges and find value in all of them.
I need who's the head of of WCW or WWF or whatever, the main guy, where he's like, oh, right, and the three different pains where his eyes are like blasting.
Vince
right?
McMahon.
Yes.
Yeah, I need a Vince McMahon meme for like, bilogical, panlogical, or whatever. Yeah, that's what I want.
All right, Donnie Dillon, get on it.
He's on it.
He's on it.
He gets paid by the meme.
Okay, so last question for all of you guys. So how should someone do it? They've heard all these pros and cons and things they've heard experiment. If someone absolutely positively says, I want to change something in my lodge, what would be your personal advice to that brother? Starting with Mike the intern.
My personal advice to them is, first, make sure that it's going to fit within your lodge culture. Just because you like the idea doesn't mean it's going to carry across everybody else. Be aware of that. The other thing is, spread the word around a little bit. Find out what the rest of the guys want. And then try it. I mean, as long as it's nothing, like I said earlier, as long as it's nothing that's going to literally change and bring Grand Lodge down on you, try it. But if it's something like that, then you guys have to sit down and talk to your DDGM and say, we want to try this for our lodge. We think it'll make a big difference. It'll make a better experience for our candidates. It'll do this, it'll do that, and see where that goes. At the very least, they'll tell you no. But, if you don't ask, it is no. And if you don't try it, and on top of that, if you don't even try, it's no. So
it's like, what's the Wayne Gretzky quote? You miss 100% of the shots you never take.
Right.
Juan, I want to try something new in lodge. What should I do?
Okay, here's my approach. If there's something about the lodge practice that you are not particularly excited about and you think could be done better, first, don't complain unless you have a plan to change it. Second, make sure that plan is like one of those evaluation goals. What are those called? The SMART goals. It needs to be specific, measurable, actionable, a resuscitated refreshment. What's the R?
Realistic and time.
Realistic. Exactly. And especially if you're going to go against something that has been established for a while, or if there's a cadre of individuals who may put a lot of resistance. So trying to implement something at a, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. The other thing, sell it. Everything in life is about selling an idea, selling, if you recognize the value of what you're proposing, make sure that you are not haphazard in the way in which you present it. Don't choose, and I've seen this happen and it just irks me to death. Some brothers wait for the longest meeting that has the most spirited discussions, and when the master asks if anybody has anything for the good of the lodge, Worship Master, if I may, I want to just throw my shoe over the lodge room. Like, you just sunk any opportunity of this being even contemplated.
That's funny.
Be smart. Like, you're not going to ask your wife if you can go out with the boys for a beer as soon as you're done with an argument. That's just not prudent. Be smart about how you present things. If you recognize the value that your idea has for the craft and for the for the energy of your lodge, just be smart about it. Present it, maybe present it before the meeting to the lodge, to the master or to some brothers. Get their opinion. See if you can get a few of you together to put together a presentation and then show the pros and the cons if necessary. But it's like there's someone, a past president of Tupperware, had a saying. He said, think big, start small, begin now.
Ooh, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Robert, I want to introduce this crazy thing that I know is going to tick off some people. What should I do?
I
Do
like
it.
the last thing Juan. Yeah, just do it. I like the last thing Juan said. Actually, yeah, like plan big, start small, but start right now. Something along those lines, right? Um, what is it? When you're 20, I operate this way all the time. It's basically when something is 20% planned, it's 80% complete. Um, I tend to think of something and then I just go, yeah, I don't see any way that can fail unless it's back on me, and that's just not going to happen. So just do it, and that's my advice. Just do it. You might there are certain things, yeah, you could get in trouble, but when I say just do it, I don't mean carte blanche, go do something stupid. It's not time to fire up ayahuasca before a degree or something. What I would say to do is anything that you want to do, you do need, as John and I talked about at the beginning, check the Constitution. Make sure it's not just make sure it's not totally it's laid out right there and says no, you can't do this. And then I would ease in. And if you're looking for a specific thing, like if you're going to change one thing to get started as an innovation in your lodge, um, I would say clean out your prep room. Just clean it out. Take everything out of it. Put a table and a chair in there, and that's it. And maybe a thing to hang some clothes on. Move the light switch to the outside of the room so you could shut it off on them in there and
that's
leave them in the
crazy
dark.
talk.
Yeah, and maybe just put an electric candle in there. Those little battery
Don't you
operated ones you
know?
pick up at
Don't
the
you
dollar
know,
store.
brother Jimmy McCready put that light switch in 62 years ago. We had
Yeah,
a light switch installation ceremony. Here's the picture on the wall of him installing
here's
that light switch.
yeah.
How dare
I
you?
want you to
How dare
no,
you?
see. I want to take the light switch. I'm gonna move it to the outside and put a little brass plaque on it that has his name on it. See what I'm gonna do there? I'm giving you the buy-in,
There you
but I'm getting
go.
what I want.
That's listen to this guy. Knows what he's talking
Yeah.
about.
So just take these little steps and like go ahead and circle back to what Mike said. Don't like you'll become so depressed if you decide that you want to do something with your lodge and you're gonna go for it and then they don't like it and then you're gonna be like screw this lodge, I'm out of here. And man, that's as much as I feel that, don't do that because it's really nobody's fault. We talked about it in the beginning of the episode. Uh, Jason mentioned it, or at least alluded to the fact that it is 100%. This is all some guys know, so it's not wrong, and we have to understand that you can't just be a jerk about it. So,
Yep.
yeah, all that stuff, all the things.
All the things. Cool. Jason.
So I'm with Robert. Start making changes. So I want to clear up something because there's been a lot of really good discussion on the YouTube chat tonight about Masonic landmarks. And well, we got these traditions and we got these landmarks that most Grand Lodges don't actually adopt and ascribe to. But that's for another show. See our episode on the historical landmarks. And we've got these traditions handed down from the UGLE, which we can't change. I don't think any of us here on the show are actually talking about that kind of change. We're talking about incremental, sustainable improvements to the Masonic experience. We're not talking about, rewriting the third degree. By the way, if you want to talk about innovations in Masonry, the third degree didn't exist until the 1730s. It's the original innovation in Freemasonry. So if you rally against landmarks and innovations, you have to kind of throw out the third degree, and in some cases the second, because really the entered apprentice degree was the original initiatory experience in the Masonic craft guilds. They grew to include the Fellow of the Craft degree in, I think, around the 1500s in Scotland. But until then, until the 1730s, after the Grand Lodges had stood up, that was when Desaguliers and his contemporaries actually got together and wrote the capstone to Blue Lodge Masonry. And that happened after the Grand Lodge system got set up and put into place.
Yeah, Masonry was a little bit
So
more loosey goosey back then, but hey. It worked.
Yeah,
It got us to here today.
it did. So when we talk about, innovating in masonry, we're not talking about making those paradigm shifting changes. We're talking about a little nudge here, a little bend here, in order to just make your Masonic experience just that much more fulfilling and that much better. And for those little nudges and those little process improvements, as we like to call them, I think it's easiest just to go and start implementing them if you can, and then if people ask questions, explain it. But the fact of the matter is, the way that our fraternity is structured, um, if you ask for permission first, in a lot of these cases, you're going to get just a blanket no, and it's much more difficult to get a yes right out the starting gate. Of course, going back to what John said, you need to make sure that you are operating well within the bounds of your Grand Lodge laws. So we're not talking about, okay, you know what, I'm going to start initiating women. Okay, if you are, in one of our jurisdictions, you can't do that. If you're in a co-Masonic jurisdiction or a female craft jurisdiction, then that's completely different. But they have their own laws that the members have to abide by. But for small, sustainable, incremental changes that make the lodge experience just that much more fulfilling and that much better, I don't see why anyone can't just start doing that. And the worshipful master rules and governs.
Yeah.
So go forth and do some good things.
Yeah, that's a good segue to what I was going to say. Step number 1, be worshipful master. That's the easiest way, because in most jurisdictions, the worshipful master has a lot of power and also rules and governs the lodge and has his prerogative. And so there are certain things that the hat and gavel carries with them that any other brother in the lodge can't do. And so there you go. You have more tools at your disposal, more power to start innovation. If you're not worshipful master, talk to your worshipful master and the wardens behind him to figure out if they're on the same page, right? Because we're talking about buy-in. And if you are a master, again, talk to your wardens behind you, because you don't want this to be a surprise, as Juan was saying. And optionally, if everybody, your officers and some of your active brethren are in on it, and you have a good relationship with your district deputy grandmaster or equivalent, bring them in on it too, right? To say, hey, just a little heads up. We at the lodge want to try this new thing. We've done our homework. We've dotted our I's, crossed our T's, make sure that this is all well and good. Here's the experience we're going for, and trying that. And then to summarize what Jason was saying, make it incremental. Don't do it all at once, right? Just don't show up and everyone's wearing, steel aprons or something like that overnight. Think of it like ripping off a Band-Aid. You don't want to just yank it all off all at once. You want to just peel it really slow, play the long game, because people will just one day show up to lodge and go, hey, wait, something's different, and they didn't even know it existed. And so if you have the patience, it's hard. It's so hard to play the long game on some of these things, but you do. And I know, talking to other brothers just within the Virginia jurisdiction, they've been playing the long game due to the way that our policies are written, and the way that certain people need to be in grand line as well as local line, and who's going to be DDGM that year. There's all sorts of stars that may need to align if you really want to try something progressive. And so do it incrementally, do it deliberately, and do it collaboratively. There you go. Okay, let's take it home by wrapping things up for Shameless Plugs. Final thoughts, starting with Hammy. Go.
So, innovations in Freemasonry go way back, obviously. We're really not talking about total changes. we're talking about, making things better for your lodge, making your, I mean, heck, some cases, education itself in your lodge might seem like an innovation. Uh, some lodges even discussing making an active library might be an innovation. Um, but these are things that you need to discuss with your brothers. And, I mean, obviously, if you become master and you're making these changes at that point for yourself, sure. But then talk to your wardens behind you to see that they're going to help support your changes that you've made in the years to come, so that it's not something that is just a flash and it was just about you. Make it about making your lodge better. And, you know, that's really what we're talking about here.
Great. Thank you, Hammy. Next up, Juan Sepulveda. What say you?
Okay. I think of the second law of thermodynamics, a closed system
doesn't?
that,
Yeah.
right? That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Obviously.
So let me read it for you here. I've found better descriptions of it, but okay. This is one of the ways that I found here in my trusty Wikipedia. It states that the total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time. The total entropy of a system and its surroundings can remain constant. And the nature, that's it's too wordy. I'm like, no. The nature of entropy, like the whole concept of entropy, is like things are going to devolve and they're going to be more chaotic with the passing of time, unless acting upon, there has to be force applied to it to preserve it intact. And does that apply to masonry? Yeah. Yes. If we leave it how it is, it's going to continue to devolve and continue to become a chaotic mess. There have to be decisions made in the future based on the circumstances that will surround us in the future. We can't foresee those today. And if we say there should be no changes in masonry, then what we're saying is we're making a commitment to drive it to the ground. And we can't allow that to happen. So in the sake of, not succumbing to entropy, we have to make sure that we are exerting energy into keeping it together as a whole and making sure that out of chaos we can form order. So can you innovate in masonry? Well, you're told not to. And I think that the spirit of that law is, don't be trying to change what we're about. Don't be trying to go into the essence of taking a rough ashlar and making it better by, intentional application. Does it mean whenever we come up with holograms, we should not incorporate them into a ritual? I hope not. I hope that that's not what was intended with that law. So for brothers out there listening, think of the most amazing lodge you can think of. And I personally know some people that have done this. And either transform your lodge to become that, or become a charter member of your own and materialize that vision. Because I think masonry as an institution, I find it to be too precious to be allowed to just remain stagnant by the anchor of, irrational fear of change. But with that, I thank everyone for being a part of the Masonic Roundtable. Thank you for the support you've shown. For all the people that are watching on Facebook, it's a new space in which we haven't had participation. We love seeing the questions in the comments. Keep them coming and let other people know that we are here Thursday nights, 9:30 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And we have new programs for you every single Thursday. So we look forward to seeing you. And finally, next year, no, let's keep that on the pocket. There's something happening next year. Oh my God, something awesome is happening next year. Might be a little humid, but it's happening. Go to thewindingstairs.com. Make sure you stay informed with everything that we're doing. I'm not gonna spoil it.
What a
Just
hook.
Just a hint.
Next year there's this.
Cigar
Oh,
lit.
never mind. I'll tell you later. Hey, did you hear? I'll tell you later. The master of sales. Good stuff. Thank you, Juan. Over to Robert. Final thoughts, shameless plugs.
Final thought, introduce the tarot direct right into your lodge. Just kidding, don't do that.
To spread it out on the altar.
Yep. Hey, it's a book, right?
Yeah.
Kidding, not kidding. So talking about Juan mentioned entropy. I love physics. So entropy was a really great example of that. Imagine a brick wall, and that's masonry. And over time, brick walls crumble. And what are we doing with the pieces? Nothing? Okay. Or are you going to refortify it? So think about it that way too. Just added little visual for you. I want to quote something a brother of my lodge said, who is a big fraternity guy, loves Greek fraternities. He says quite often, and I'll take some heat for this probably, respect the past, but don't be a slave to tradition. And I think that's interesting. So you can pull that apart, right? We respect our traditions here in Freemasonry. I'm not advocating getting rid of traditions, but I do advocate for keeping up with the times. There was a time when Freemasonry was so on the forefront of everything that people looked to the fraternity for answers. Now they look for the fraternity because we're nothing to outsiders, right? We're everything to ourselves,
Right.
but when people don't know about us, they don't care, right? But that can't be true, because God forbid we come to grips with the reality that nobody cares out there. Only we care. We care about these titles. We care about what we do. We care about this stuff. This means nothing to anybody else. So what are we going to do to change that? And I don't mean like innovate things to make us relevant for today's world, right? Because everybody's like, oh, we don't need to be relevant for the modern world. They have all these problems out there today. But what about our problems? We have problems too. And so I think part of that is getting honest with ourselves and trying to figure out how we stay relevant, and we can compose a system where we are becoming more relevant, and this helps us innovate in legal ways without losing traditional parts of who we are and where we come from. So that's my final thought on that. If you like Masonic podcasts, Whence Came You, Sundays at 9:30. Last week we had a really cool episode. We did a audio recording of Clausen from the Scottish Rite, which was just an amazing talk. So check that out. Next week, I don't know what we're having on. And lastly, MasonicConChicago.com. So you can spell it Masonic Con, or you can just go to MasonicCon Chicago, whichever you want, and sign up to get the email list. We announced our first speaker last week on social media, and the week before that to the subscribers. So our first speaker is Timothy Hogan. We're going to have Tim Hogan out in 2020, September. So make sure you sign up for email updates, because we're putting out videos for each of the speakers bi-weekly. Bi-weekly, does that mean every other week? Every other week. And in the interim, they'll go to Facebook. So subscribers get it first, and a week later they go to social media. So check it out. Thanks.
Cool. Over to you, Jason.
All right. Great episode. Really, really good discussions on, what are innovations, and how long have they been a part of Freemasonry. And the fact of the matter is, Freemasonry and Masonry in general started as an innovation. It was a way to bring craftsmen together, and they had to innovate to bring these craftsmen craftsmen together. They had to innovate to standardize the craft, and they had to innovate to create charters to protect the craft from Callans and eavesdroppers. So innovations are not inherently bad, and we have to get over this concept that Freemasonry is this unshakable rock that has remained changeless since time immemorial. That's just wrong. Um, we have historical evidence that points to the contrary. So it doesn't mean we should throw away traditions or just change things just because we want to. I think we need to be very careful about what we choose to improve and what we realize that perhaps doesn't need any improvement at this point in time. So, I would caution everybody against getting that knee-jerk, sinking gut feeling whenever someone talks about innovations, because Freemasonry was founded on innovations. And if Freemasonry wants to continue to exist, more innovations will have to be put into the organization, because Freemasonry in its current state won't. That's just the truth backed up by data at this point in time. So with that, thanks everybody for watching. I know ending on a downer note at this point in time. Let's see, what have I got going on? Hey, for those of you who are subscribed to the Fraternal Review, the Southern California Research Lodges magazine, you're in for a treat because I am guest editing the October issue, and it's going to be absolutely phenomenal. I've got some new content for that issue that's never been published before. So if you're not a member or you don't have a subscription, go ahead and subscribe before October so that you can get that issue, because I think it's going to be really good.
Awesome. Looking forward to it because it's going to be a good one. Let's see. For my final thoughts, I just wanted to mention that in old maps, whenever there was uncharted territory, there was a tradition to add in to the corner of the map, "Here be dragons," or something along the effect of, "Look out, there are dragons ahead." And it was meant to be unexplored, right, and to give warning, but also became a tongue-in-cheek reference to just to be careful and choose your path wisely. And so when you innovate in Masonry, just be careful. Warning, there are dragons ahead. And so the good news is you get to pick your dragons, whether you pick little tiny dragons as you explore incrementally. Don't fight the level 50 boss with your wooden armor. Like, just don't do it. Make sure you build up to the big battles, but be deliberate, be thoughtful, be incremental, and be it with the full support of your brethren. And I think you'll have good success as we progress and take this fraternity into new bounds. So, with that, this has been a great episode. If you want to learn more about how you can take some of these practices and put them into your lodge, Robert and I wrote a really cool book that we're proud of that takes some of these best practices and turns them into real practical things you can do for your lodge, called It's Business Time. Go look us up on Amazon and Audible, and we hope you will use some of those techniques to innovate and introduce new concepts into your lodge. With that, I want to say thank you all very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.